Good evening and welcome to another conversation piece. What Now Irishman? I won't lie, I'm a little bit starstruck with my guest today because I'm a huge fan of his work and have been for quite some time. Um, he is an author, he's a philosopher, he's probably Ireland's leading libertarian voice. So I'm very, very, very happy to bring Mr. Gerard Casey to the stage. Gerard, thank you very much for doing this.
Not at all, Martin. Happy to be here. Happy to be here. By the way, before you ask me any questions, I like the hat on the intro. The hat was great. I just love the hat. I want that hat, right? Okay, so when you're
it's good. Hey, look. People knock AI, but it's absolutely fantastic. I'll just give you. I'll give you a quick little background to that image. That image, I asked AI, Grok specifically, to give me a visual representation of how Ireland feels right now, and it brought up this dark dystopian green area
Wow.
with this lonely little man walking along this windy path. And
Wow.
I just went, wow, that's fantastic. So what I did is I animated it afterwards, and then obviously stuck myself into it. So there's a story behind that. I'll keep that image forever because it's
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant.
It means a lot to me. Now I've been waylaid and sidetracked, so you know the question has come. Yeah. So what now, Irishman?
Very good. What now? Oh God, I have no answer to that question. I keep saying my job is, certainly at this stage of my life, is one of analysis and so on. I mean, I have some, I can make some minor prescriptions, but certainly, I mean, when I look around at the list of things that are problematic, I made a list about 2 weeks ago, and I was so depressed after I made the list that I kind of went out for the rest of the day just to forget about it. There were about 10 items on the list that were like depressing me. And so in a sense, I don't know. I mean, I gave a talk, maybe about a year ago, and I just made the point that my future is behind me. I've done what I've done. I write what I write. We have problems up to here, but all I can do is, if you like, provide some intellectual ammunition for people, and they're the ones who are going to have to carry the guns and fire the ammunition at people. I'm not in a position to do that. In fact, I'm finding it increasingly hard. It's just, I mean, it's a matter of age, a matter of energy. My mind is still, thankfully, as active as ever when I don't have a cold like I do now. But I finished a book recently, nothing to do with politics, by the way. It took me a year to do it. But I found when I was writing it, I had really slowed down. My capacity for sort of reading and researching and making notes and writing had diminished considerably. So what now? I don't know. I mean, your guess is as good as mine. I feel like, who was which British politician was it who said what was the most significant or the most salient feature of politics? And he said, "Events, dear boy, events." Okay.
I've heard the quote, but I couldn't tell you.
And I don't know who it was. I can't attribute it to anyone. So yeah.
So you're a retiree, okay?
Yes.
You have lived your life. You've lived a good life. You've had a very, very successful life. We'll talk about, because I do want to talk about Notre Dame and the American colleges in the 1980s. But you've reached, you know what I mean. This is your chill out time, so to speak. You know what I mean. You've served your time. You should be relaxing. But from following you on social media, on Twitter, you're not relaxing. You're very, very, very anxious, and there's even a little bit of anger sometimes, and there's a little bit of disbelief in what you post, and there's an unhappiness. How did we get here? Why can't you retire in peace?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I was saying to my wife some years ago that somehow all my life I seem to have been on the wrong side of history, and that I seem to be permanently engaged in a fight or a struggle. And I didn't know why this was. And she looked at me steadily and she said, "It's your personality." Okay. So I don't know. I mean, I made an effort to, about a year ago, when I got seriously working on my book, to take a break, and I did for some months. But literally couldn't stay out of the fight. And as soon as I'd finished writing the manuscript, I was back again, because there's so many things that we need to talk about. There's so many dangers that face us. I mean, we've got immigration, we've got Islam, which I think is like the major danger. We've got the growth of the new empire in the EU. We've got gosh, there's so many things. I'm not happy with the state of the church and its leadership, which for me, as I'm a Catholic, is really depressing. And because that was my one kind of safety blanket, that was my one place where I could kind of go. And now even that seems to be, as it were, taken away from me. And I'm really concerned about that. And so many other things. However, in my personal life, I should say, by the way, I don't want to turn this into a kind of Andrew's Ashes. With my family and my grandchildren and my wife and so on, everything is fine. We're great. All my lads are working, employed. They're all doing their own thing. You know, I look at them and I think, well, at least I've done something good. I brought them up. I've launched them into the world. They're on their own. They're doing their own thing, and that's great. So I'm very happy about that. But as I look at the world, no, not so much.
Just to dig into a couple of points there. So let's go back to where you started. Because I understand what you're saying. You said you're always on the wrong side of the history, or you're. There's the old Irish term would be you're just a bit difficult. So I would fall into the same category. I've questioned everything all my life. I can't help it. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing it this way? Is this not better? So I do understand that. It can make for a lonely existence, but also a very, very positive one. I found that you have a much smaller circle of friends, but they're actually friends. You know what I mean? But they're you know that handful of people are the people that you want to surround yourself with. So there's positives, negatives. Sometimes it can be very, very lonely.
Yeah.
You spoke about sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say I never needed many friends. I mean, I have friends and so on, and they're great. But I've lived my life in books from the age of 4. I taught myself to read before I went to school, and I joined in my local library. I think it was 4 or 5 years old, and they made me do a reading test before they would give me a card. I can even remember the book they gave me to read. It was about chimpanzees. Okay, and then they reluctantly handed me a card, and ever since then, like book. I'm never without a book, or even I'm usually reading 3 or 4 books at the same time, whatever they might be.
Wow,
and so I've lived my life there. I can remember even when I was, I hated school. Apart from certain things, I hated school. I hated the regimentation. I couldn't wait to get out of secondary school. I regarded it as a form of involuntary incarceration. And I had so when we were in a chemistry lab, which looked like a scene from Frankenstein. Okay, it was so old, it was so elderly. The Bunsen burners were probably made by hand by Bunsen. They were so old. I can remember asking things like, "What is electricity? What does it do, or what is how does it? What are the laws concerning it? But what actually is it?" And I was basically told to shut up and get on with it, right? And so I lost interest in schooling by and large, barely scraped through with a leaving cert. But I was reading all the time in the public library. I was reading. That's when I was in school. Most of the time I wasn't in school, by the way. I was off mitching and so on.
Yeah,
but I was reading all the time. And so when I finally finished my secondary education, I was absolutely thrilled and said, that's the last time I'll ever be in an educational establishment in my life. And here we are.
and you spent how many years teaching?
I spent over 30 years, 35 years teaching.
Yeah. Famous last words. You just switched sides.
I did. So I became torturer instead of tortured.
I wanted to go back to a couple of things you said, but you've actually hit something that's I believe is more important. You just described school as essentially a form of prison. So I have very strong opinions on education. I personally believe if you reach the age of 12 with the ability to read, write, and do basic mathematics, there's nothing you cannot achieve in this world. Simple as that. If you can read and write and do simple mathematics, the world is your oyster. It's about desire then after that and what you want to learn. But we inherited a UK system of education. We never really adapted our own education system. You can say the same about government. You can say the same about an awful lot of our systems.
Absolutely.
there was nothing new created. We just continued on with the imperial system, whatever you want to call it, the empire system, and we just put a Catholic cross in the classroom, and that was it. And nothing else changed. And we'll swing around to religion as well, because it is something I want to talk to you. I'm a Christian myself, born and raised a Roman Catholic, but I identify as a Christian. I've no interest in the current pageantry of the Roman Catholic Church. I think they've veered too far from the message, and I don't need the middleman. And again, it's a personal choice. But to go back to education, we can fix an awful lot of the world's problems through education. You always had, when people talk about improving lower socioeconomic areas, we'll teach them, we'll educate them out of the poverty, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the system's never been fit for purpose, because we don't teach people the things my dad taught me and the things I've taught my children. I know for a fact my children are in a minority with their abilities and what they know how to do and what they understand, to even simple things like wiring a plug and changing the tire on a car, and the basic stuff, the stuff you need in life. You know what I mean? A basic understanding of pretty much everything. Why has our education system never geared towards what actual life is, as opposed to just these texts that you get a book and you're just told to memorize this, and if you memorize this really, really well, you get 600 points and you're leaving certain. If mommy and daddy are wealthy, they can send you to college.
That's right. Well, I actually have even more radical views on education. I would abolish all schools. In other words, I wouldn't abolish the schools. I would just remove all funding from all schools at every stage, primary, secondary, and third level. And I would let them float on the market, let them do whatever they want. If people want to, if there are services that they're providing that people want, then they will pay for them. If they don't, they won't. First of all, primary school. Primary schooling is an incredibly complicated and expensive babysitting service, for the most part. It doesn't take 6 years to teach a child to read and write. You can teach your children to do that yourself. Most of it, as I said, is sort of daycare for the children while the parents are out working. Secondary school is, again, unless people really want the kinds of things that you would do at a stage later than about 12, which some people would want to do, is largely a waste of time. And again, all of this schooling, by the way, was designed, and we know this comes out of Prussia in the 19th century, and was adapted in the US and here to some extent to provide good little workers and so on. And so everything was regimented, everybody was in class, and you sit there quietly. It's particularly tough on boys. Whatever about girls, right? But it's tough on boys just to sit silently and quietly in class. Not that we did much of that if we could possibly get away with it, but So, and as for third level, this has become absolutely ridiculous. I was just reflecting that. So just to come back to my own story for a second, I left school at 18, but I didn't go to university till I was in my mid-20s. And the reason for that was I wanted people to talk to. It was as simple as that. And I had lots of jobs in various places, mostly manual labor of various kinds. But the trouble was that while we would have conversations on football and all of the other kinds of things, and that's fine. I still have those conversations. That wasn't anything else, right? And I wanted to go somewhere where people would talk about serious things seriously, and that's why I went to university. Getting a degree was sort of more or less. It was actually a bit of a surprise to me when it happened, because I sort of didn't expect it. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But again, the cohort of students who came out of second level at that time, of that cohort, 7% went to university. Being a university student, in a sense, was almost a social distinction. Okay. Now it's 63%. It's 9 times as high. Okay. And so what has happened is that what people call education, which of course in many cases is simply certification, has and related to getting a job, what you've done is you simply increase the supply, okay, for either a dormant or a diminishing demand, okay, which means that from that point of view, as a tool of access to employment, education, certification, and so on has become less valuable. And people are
But
asking, why am I doing this?
But did you realize that Ireland found a solution to your figures there? Your 63%, 33,000 NGOs. That is the solution. You've all these people with these nonsense degrees coming out of education. Where did they go? Who's employing these people? That's why there's so many NGOs. They're all going into NGOs and getting paid by the taxpayer.
Yeah, I suspect that I would. Well, I'm not sure if it would account for all of them, but certainly it would account for a fair few of them. But another thing that's happened, and this is directly relevant to the idea of education as distinct from schooling. I distinguish the two very sharply. They're not the same thing. You can be schooled without being educated. You can be educated without being schooled. Sometimes you can go to school and be educated if you're lucky. If you find I had one very good teacher in second level, but until very recently, if you wanted information above the basic level, there were certain institutions which were, as it were, guardians of it, right? I mean, the university libraries only existed in universities, and to avail of them, you had to be in a university. Even in Cork City, where I grew up, the Cork City Library, which wasn't a bad library by whatever standards, but it didn't carry much in the way of thoughtful content. So in order to access this material, you had to go there. So, and again, if you wanted certain trades or skills beyond an apprenticeship level, by the way, I'm a great fan of apprenticeship. Right? It's another story. Okay, medicine should be done that way, and law should be done that way. It's another story, but we'll come back to that later. You generally had to say again.
I'm just saying law apprenticeships. That's very, very interesting.
Oh yeah, but that's how it used to be done. That's how it used to be done. In other words, you got yourself articled as a clerk in a solicitor's office. You made the tea. You carried the papers around. You learned a little bit. You did some jobs and so on and so forth. And eventually, the bar was essentially the same sort of thing. And basically anybody could read for the bar, present yourself for the examination, and which was minimal in many cases, and then throw yourself on the public. And if people wanted to employ you, they could, and if they didn't, they didn't, and that was it. Okay. Yeah. The only way you could get work was by being competent or developing a competency and so on. The same is true, by the way, for nursing. Nursing degrees is an idiotic idea. It's insane. Okay, and much of the medical training is not pointless, but redundant and so on. Much of it can be done elsewhere. But anyway, we can get back to that. Whether or which, the story now is that given the nature of the internet, the information of the world is at your fingertips. Okay, yeah, on the end of a phone.
In other words, no excuse for ignorance.
And that's, but I mean, I was reflecting on this again on my teaching experience. When I came back to Ireland from America, I was used to teaching the American way, which was you had books allocated at the, in advance. Students would have them when they arrived on the first day. There would be an introductory lecture, and then the second lecture for me would be, John Murphy, Descartes says in the first of the meditations the following. What does he mean by that? Okay, and the students would respond and so on and so forth, some better than others, but that's how it went. So I came back to UCD and I discovered, no, this is not how we do it here. In UCD in 1986, my job was to convey information. The students either didn't have or didn't want to buy books, and the library was very poor. And so I was the primary information deliverer. It sounds weird, okay, when you think about it. And of course, I can talk 7 times faster than anybody can take notes, right? So I tried to teach in a seminar style as I was doing in the United States, and the students resented it. They resented it because it prevented them acquiring this information. And they particularly resented it if another student asked a question. Okay, so after I tried this for years, and I almost quit academia. I almost gave up. It was so depressing. I thought, this is absurd.
Is that indoctrination, or is it laziness on the students' parts?
Well, it was just the way it had happened. I mean, in a sense, it's almost a carryover from medieval times. I mean, the very word lecturer means a reader. And in those days, because books weren't printed, this is before printing, before Gutenberg, the only one that had a book was, and so on, and so you would have to read it and comment on it and so on. So it's an old technique, but it suited its time. But I was thinking, well, we don't really, even in the mid 1980s, we didn't really need to. If you just bought the damn book, okay. And I used to make a joke. I once said to the students, I said, I have a plan, I have a proposal for you. And they said, really, what's that? And I said, well, I want you all to give me £50 or whatever the currency was in those days, and I'll go to the cinema every week, and I'll come back and tell you about it. And they said, what? And I said, well, what's wrong with that? And I go, well, if we want to see films, we go see them ourselves. And I go, yeah, but this is exactly what you're doing. So here we have Descartes and Kant and all of the others, right? And I've read them. You haven't read them. Okay. So you're the only one, you're listening to me talking about them. It's as if I went to a film, came back and started telling you all about it. Well, it's a whole lot more fun if both of us have seen the film, because then we can have an intelligent conversation. Otherwise, it's just me talking, right? So why don't you read the damn book? So it was very frustrating. And I felt sorry for the students in some ways, but nonetheless. But then the electronic revolution happened. And to me, the universities really haven't come to terms with this. So the last major course I taught before I retired was called Anarchy, Law and the State. And electronically, I was able to put up on Blackboard, which was their kind of system for holding materials, right? I was able to put up MP3 files, YouTube videos, full-length books, articles, more material than I could have accumulated as an undergraduate myself if I spent the entire year doing it, all at a fingertip. And it meant that when the students were engaging with me, which they did, I can tell you more about the course later if you're interested, I would give them a path to follow through the readings so they could then explore for themselves. Okay, instead of just doing the usual thing, which is like cramming, okay, 5 minutes before the examination. Okay, and it worked brilliantly. It worked from the point of view of student and student engagement, and I enjoyed it. In fact, it got so much fun. At times, the conversation got so interesting and involved that I could have gone off for a coffee for 15 minutes, and nobody would have noticed I was missing. Okay,
very good.
So,
okay,
so anyway,
I just want
to finish that point, Martin.
Yeah,
just to finish, so the electronic thing has now made a lot of what was done in lecturing redundant. And so the question is, this is the question that I think the universities haven't completely addressed, is if all the material is already available to the students and you can point out where it is, what is the added value of the time that you're standing in front of those students? What are you adding to it except boring them? Okay. In other words, and students, of course, are perfectly rational. If they discover that they have the material already somewhere else and that all they're going to get from you is you reading this to them more slowly than they can read it themselves, you know what they will do? They won't turn up. That's perfectly rational. Makes no sense. And so you have to ask yourself, what can I give that is extra to what they can get from the reading? And my answer to that is, it has to be interactive. It has to be getting them to make use of what they're reading, okay, and getting feedback from you and from the other students. So as part of the pedagogic effort that you're doing. If you're not doing that, it seems to me you're wasting their time. You're wasting your time.
I'm kind of caught between two places now, because I actually want to continue in this line of conversation, but there's so much other stuff I want to talk to you about.
Yeah.
I do have to ask about your. I said I was going to. I'm curious as to your experiences in. I think it's two prestigious universities in Notre Dame, and I apologize, I can't remember the second one. But you spent a huge amount of your career working in third level environments, whereas I jokingly call them now little Marxist factories.
Yeah.
But yeah. I just kind of want to know, from your entry point to your exit point, did you see a shift in academia, in the people coming in the people that were there? Is this a hangover from the 1960s? Is it just people with tenure? Is it cultural Marxism infecting the education system? What has happened to third level education? I was in third level education, and this is going back to the what was this, 90, 98, 99 kind of time. Again, I was very young, so I wouldn't have noticed much around me, and I treated college like school. I didn't go very often. It's just immaturity on my part. I was
I know, I know.
leaving Cert down when I was 17, straight into college. Didn't know my arse from my elbow, kind of thing, and just partied like a wild man. But have you? Uh, could you see it yourself while you were in it, or am I completely wrong? Is this just
No,
fantasy?
I didn't see it, and there's a reason. There's a reason for that. I got to have to be careful here because it's going to sound like I'm sort of boasting and so on, but I don't mean it that way. It's just that I was having such a good time in the university, and I don't mean by that partying or anything like that. I mean intellectually. So, for example, there would be parties. So at a typical party, there would be like everybody would be dancing and doing various other things, and there'd be 3 or 4 nerds sitting around the kitchen table talking about Marx or something like that, and I'd be one of those people. And I would do that until 5 o'clock in the morning, and then I would go home and I would write a paper. That for me was the intellectual ferment and the excitement. So for me, it was like one end. It was like dying and going to intellectual heaven, and that was my undergraduate by and large. And when I went to graduate school at Notre Dame, it all stepped up a notch because there were about 40 graduate students in residence and about maybe as many staff there. So it was like a huge number of very gifted people. And all of these students were, for the most part, people at the top of their class in the undergraduate institution. So the discussions and the arguments and the level of engagement was so much higher. I mean, I can remember we used to have these little study rooms in the library, and of course, rather than doing any of the work we were supposed to be doing, we would kind of knock around to the other guys' little study carrel, and we'd engage in kind of conversation, and that could take through 2 or 3 hours. So that was the kind of learning environment. So mine wouldn't have been normal. I wasn't looking. I didn't get a degree to get a job, and in a sense, it's hard to believe it, but I kind of drifted into graduate education. Um, and without even a thought of what would happen. And it wasn't until I was finishing that I thought, oh, good gracious, I've got a wife and 2 children. I better get something that can pay the bills. So yeah, so I didn't notice that. That would have been my experience. And I would have said that even at UCD, when I came back to UCD in the mid '80s and afterwards, the kind of what we were still a long way from where we are now. Right? There were plenty of students who were there because their parents could afford to send them, and it was basically delaying work. And there were others who weren't particularly brilliant, but they were doing okay. And then there was the few, maybe the 10%, who were really, really bright, and you kind of lived for them, and that was fine, and so on. But we've since I would put the kind of change later. I mean, from my own personal experience, the change took place in UCD around 2003, 2004, with the accession of a new president and a new model of governance for the university, taking it from a self-governing institution, right, into a more top-down management style, and that altered everything. So that's on that side of things, and then you began to get sort of grade inflation. And then this larger numbers of students coming through, and all sorts of yeah. So I mean, there were now I want to put it in perspective. There were lots of good students. I had really good experiences. I had very many really lively minds. It was great, and so on. But coming towards the end, when I retired in 2015, I was glad to retire. In the end, it was getting more difficult for me. It was more difficult again because the political tone of the university was already shifting, had already shifted in a beginning way towards the kind of PC stuff that we're now seeing and all of the woke stuff, which has become much worse in the time since I left. Okay, and I would have found that almost impossible to deal with. Okay, so anyway, yeah, that was how it worked.
If okay, so the reality would be you would not survive in the current. You wouldn't be tolerated in the
I
current
wouldn't be
university
hired.
in Ireland.
There's
Yeah,
no way they
yeah,
give me a job.
yeah.
I'm a white man for a start. That's a, yeah.
I,
I'm a white conservative man. I'm a white conservative Christian man. Right? All these things are bad.
again, okay, and I suppose it's important that I kind of that you say this out loud, okay, because it's so easy for somebody to throw the slur that you saying that, oh, you're conservative, you're racist, you're this, that, and the other. You know what I mean? So you're a highly educated man who's worked in numerous universities, who degrees philosophy. You were a deep thinker. I don't think you say anything lightly. I think everything you say, you put a good amount of thought into it. But it exists. White racism exists, or racism against white people exists, and there is. Do you go down rabbit holes? Do you engage even for fun in the conspiracy theories? Do you think there's a big bad evil, sitting in the chair stroking its white cat, that or is it just, as I see it, as just a series of systems layered upon each other?
There might be sort of really, really dark moments when I'm inclined to think that, but no. Generally, no. I mean, that's the way it works out. My father taught me a lesson, which a long time ago, and he said to me, if you can attribute something to stupidity rather than malice, go with that. In other words, your presumption is that if something bad is happening, it's because people aren't very smart or very clever or have the wrong idea of doing it, and that malice is something it might be there. But don't presume that that's what's activating it at the start. And so a lot of what I see in the world is I think derives from people who haven't had much experience of the world and the realities of it, wanting to change it for the better as they see it, okay, but not actually knowing, okay, what it is that they're doing, and in fact worsening the situation.
I have a term.
Some may actually be doing it maliciously.
Yeah.
But I suspect most people are not. And that's unfortunate. And so my experience of young people has been good. I actually liked students. I liked talking to them all the time. I was interested in what they were doing afterwards. And, I got on really, really well with students. And they kind of kept me young. So I was surprised when they all stayed the same age and I kept getting older. But and there were lots of interesting, lots of especially at the top level of students, interesting minds. I can remember in that course I was teaching on anarchy law in the state. One of the things I did was I had them write something for me every week, a short, a kind of opinion piece, which I said, I want blood on the page. It has to be short, and it can be anything related to the course except what I said, because I know what I said, right? But it can be like an expostulation, an argument, a counter argument, whatever. I don't care. Just kind of don't bore me. That's the main thing, right? And so there was a joint law and philosophy degree, and so some of the students in the course were taking that, and they were some of the brightest. And I can remember one young woman. I would give these out at I'd get these on the Friday, and I would give them back on the Monday or Tuesday, depending on when my next class was. Because you need to get that. You need to get that back quickly, otherwise it's pointless, right? And so my comments would range from maybe just a question mark to 2 pages, okay, depending on what I got, right? And so I used to give it out at the end of the class, and so I did that. She came up. She was one of the first. I gave her hers, and she went off, and then the others were coming back, and I was handing it out, and so by the time I was getting to the last one, I saw she'd come back in. And she came up kind of breathless, and she said, "You blew my argument out of the water." Now, I was thrilled with that. Not because of some victory, but because she read the comments and she was engaging with the comments. I'll give you another instance from the same course. I always began, apart from the introductory session, which was me talking and so on. After that, I began like you do with a question, right? So the students came up one day and said, "Okay, what's the answer to the question?" And I said, "I'm not telling you." And they said, "What?" I said, "No, I'm not telling you. I'm not telling you." So anyway, they were a bit disgruntled and they went off. And they
what was the question?
Oh, I can't remember. It was in one of the things that came up in my anarchy law in the state course, right?
Yeah.
It could have been any of a number of things. I don't remember. But they came back and said, "Oh, we went off to the restaurant afterwards." This say it was like 2:00, and we were there until 6, talking this over.
Brilliant.
And I smiled to myself and I thought, that's exactly what I wanted you to do. All right?
Job done. Yeah.
Yeah. No, so that's what I mean. So when I was talking about earlier about making your contact time effective as possible, that's what I did And I was able to do that in the last 8 to 10 years of my time. And that kind of kept me sane. And the students were great. I mean, they by and large, the students in that course, because it's fully subscribed, you know, I got levels of engagement 85, 90%, which is fantastic.
Where do your students go after they're finished and if they put the work in and they get their accreditation? Where would they've gone after your course? Where are
Well,
they
most
now?
of,
Is what I'm asking.
well,
Yeah.
that's a good question. Some of them would go off into civil service jobs. Some of them would go on into education, into further education. So some of them would do a course in business and move into that area. Others were in law and would continue, and so on. So they were all pretty active. Okay. Yeah. I haven't seen, gosh, it's been a long time now since I've seen some of my students. I used to keep in more or less regular contact for a while, but these things kind of fade
You
out
drift.
after a while.
It's a natural
Unless
progression.
you have an institutional place, as it were, where you meet and so on. So no, so they were all, yeah. They had things to do, and most of them, I would have thought, especially the better ones, would have had interesting careers.
Are you not
Interestingly enough,
are you not allowed to go back to UCD and get like free donuts or anything like that? Is it not a
I have a policy of not going back to UCD. Yeah, in
very
fact, I've
good?
been retired. I've been retired for 10 years, and we had in UCD a room which was made available to members of staff who were retired, where they could hang out and do various things. And I used to refer to the inhabitants of that room as the Legion of the Forgotten but Not Gone.
Very good.
And
Very good.
so the trouble is, you see, if you're not actively involved in the institution, you're just getting in the way of other people. They're polite to you and they'll talk to you, but you're no longer part of the enterprise.
Were
And in
you
a sense,
were you ever invited back to speak or to?
no, never, not a single one, not a single time. Well, I
That
left.
is
I mean, my last kind of couple of years were fraught to some extent, and I can understand why they wouldn't want me back, and so on. But yeah, never, not a single one. So I was just reflecting on this actually for another process, and I think that I've been back in UCD in the 10 years since I left fewer than 10 times. Once to a book launch of a colleague, once to a lunch arranged by two of my colleagues. I think on 2 occasions to visiting speakers from outside the university, and about 3 or 4 times in the context of writing my book when I needed to get something from the library. So that'll be it. Yeah. So I regard my time. I mean, that's part of my life that's completely outside my interest at the moment. And yeah, if people want to get nostalgic about it and wax lyrical about it, I'm going to say you're going to have to talk to somebody else because I'm not interested.
Yeah. I'm actually, like I said, the reason I'm interested in the education, and I've asked the question already, is I wanted to see, did someone like you notice the change? You gave a fantastic answer, especially kind of in your younger days, that you were engaging in conversation, and you actually said, you were talking about Marx or something like that. Why? Okay, so we have so many troubles in the country. We have so many woes. There's so much wrong. But one of the biggest things that has happened is the divide between left and right. And I view the political spectrum differently to most. It's not a line. I believe it's a circle, and it doesn't matter how far left or right you go, you end up in the same place. There's a beautiful sweet spot at the top, where you can have conservative economics. You can have I don't like socialism. I don't like anything to do with communism, Marxism, it's not something I want anywhere near. I don't even want it in Europe. I don't want it anywhere. I want it off the planet, to be honest with you. But
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I'd be conservative economically, but I also understand that you must always have a safety net, and I also differentiate between those who can't and those who won't. Those who can't, you have to have a safety net for. Those who won't, I owe you nothing. Not,
Okay,
not,
good.
not even butter vouchers. I owe you nothing.
All
But
right.
but to take that stance, I have to be involved in creating a society where it is harder to fail than it is to succeed. We don't have that society at present, mainly because we have a socialist society that gives people an easy out.
Yeah.
Um, how do
Okay.
we start undoing that big mouthful that
All
I
right.
just put at you?
I'll answer that. And I may, and what I say may actually shock you initially, but I think when I explain it, you'll see where I'm going. So I've had two conversions in my life. One was a religious conversion because I became, if you like, alienated and indeed an atheist at the age of 16, and I became a Catholic again when I was 30. So we won't talk about that. That's something of the past. But politically and economically and socially, I would have been nothing in particular. I didn't really think about these things very much. And when it came to economics, I would have had a kind of what you might call a zero-sum game, that there was a kind of fixed amount of goods, okay, whatever they might be, and therefore, if you had more than somebody else, it could only be because you had taken it, as it were, from the pile, more than you were entitled to. Okay, I'm expressing this very crudely, but that's it. It's
No,
sort of zero sum.
To be honest, this is actually the level of conversation that, because we're going to go into some deeper stuff afterwards. So I want to put down a good foundation for the viewers. Yeah.
So what happened was then in the early 2000s, I was interested in the social phenomena, particularly the phenomenon of money, because it seemed to me quite bizarre that somebody was willing to give you goods and services, real goods and real services, for a little scrappy piece of paper. And I was saying, like, well, I can produce much better quality pieces of paper than these, but nobody's going to give me goods and services for those. What's the difference? Okay. Anyway, so a colleague of mine went off to Germany, and when he came back, he brought me a copy of a book called The Theory of Money and Credit by Ludwig von Mises. This is a German book. And my former mentor in UCD used to say to me, Mr. Casey, he would say, when you're reading a French book, you don't need to read the footnotes. They're just there for decoration. When you read a German book, however, read only the footnotes. It was being funny. But this was like a German, like, I don't know, 400 or 500 pages. But the question that was, see, this is where education really works. If you have a living question, a really vital question that you need answers to, then if you're lucky enough to come across the material, when you encounter it, it's like a light bulb goes off in your head. So this answered my question. And what it gave to me, however, which was like, this is going to sound kind of funny, and I think this is what really shocked you. And the answer is, yeah, it told me that the following, I'm going to express it as clearly as I can, that in an uncoerced exchange, both sides benefit. In other words, an uncoerced exchange is positive sum, not zero sum. Now, it may be that within a microsecond of your making the exchange, you change your mind. Have you ever made an impulse buy? Of course you have. We've all done it, right? But the point, that's not the point. The point is that at the moment of exchange, and it has to be an uncoerced exchange, nobody's holding a gun to your head or threatening you with something, okay? That you benefit and the person you exchange with benefit. That's how wealth is created. Now, that was shocking to me, and I'll explain why. Because in the world of philosophy, that's what we would call an a priori proposition.
Okay,
which is,
that's a word I've never heard before. So,
well, a priori, I'll tell you what it means. Okay, it means it's something which is true and necessarily true, but not simply a matter of convention. So, I'll give you an example. If I say bachelors are unmarried men, that's necessarily true, but that's because that's what a bachelor is.
Yeah.
Okay. It's just another word for an unmarried man, right? So you're not getting any extra. You're getting a piece of information about the language, but you're not getting any information. But the impact of realizing that uncoerced exchanges are zero, are positive sum, and necessarily positive sum, not just accidentally. In other words, there was no, once you understood this point, you don't go around the world checking exchanges to see if this is the case. It has to be the case. Now, what will be the case empirically when you go around the world is you may well be puzzled by what people are exchanging. from your point of view, you're going to say, I would never have given that for that. That's not the point. You're not party to the exchange. Okay. So my hackneyed example was, if you were an Indian tribe in the eastern, what is now the eastern United States, and you had lots of islands in your possession, but what you didn't have was a necklace for your wife's birthday, and a guy came along and said, hey, here, if I'll give you this nice necklace for your wife if you give me the scrubby island over here. And he goes, yes, sounds good to me. And off we go, right? Now, the island turns out to be Manhattan, but that's another story. Okay, whatever. Okay, at the point of exchange, right? Whatever happens later, it's positive sum. So in philosophy, by and large, a priori propositions that were necessarily true and informative, largely only were mathematical or logical. But this wasn't mathematical or logical. I didn't realize there could be an a priori proposition that was necessarily true in the area of human exchange. And in other words, I suspect that anybody listening to this is going to be going, I still don't understand what he's talking about. But for me, it was like a seismic shock. And it changed my whole way of thinking. Absolutely. It was the beginning of a conversion to what I would now call Austrian economics. Mm-hmm. Okay. And a discovery that there was a whole active school involved in this. And then after a few years, I started reading everything I could get my hands on, everything that Mises had written, everything that then Rothbard had written. Then I discovered the von Mises Institute in Alabama. I read all of their stuff. And then eventually I went to one of their conferences and I gave a paper there back in 2007. And it was kind of funny because I can remember Tom Woods, who's one of the senior people there, said to me afterwards, we didn't know who you were. And when you'd given your talk, we said to one another, who is this guy? Because it was largely an American phenomenon. So that was hugely significant and changed my way of thinking completely. Now, let me come to answer the question about your safety net. I haven't forgotten it. So I'm going to send you a paper I wrote, which has as its title, Let the Poor Starve, ! Close quotes. And the reason I wrote this was as follows, that from the libertarian point of view, or the libertarian anarchist point of view, if you go full card-carrying libertarian anarchist on this, you believe, as I do, that everything that human beings need can be supplied by themselves in cooperation with one another. We don't need a top-down government to do that. Mm-hmm. Okay? And that includes law, justice, and security.
Yep.
Now, intellectually, many people will come with you, through like commerce and various other things, health and even education and so on. But when you get to law, justice, and security, they're inclined to stick and say, no, we can only have one monopolistic source of this in any coherent society. Okay, so that's the kind of intellectual stopping point, right? But then, to my surprise, I discovered that the most important objection people had to libertarian anarchism was that they believed that if you had a society based on that principle, you would end up with large people thrown on the garbage pile, starving, destitute, with no one to care for them. So that's why I set this paper up. Okay, I'm going to address this head on. Let the poor starve. It was given originally in Belfast, and the Socialist Workers' Party kept tearing down the posters.
Of course they would.
But anyway, the point I was going to make is that I'll send it to you, and you're perfectly free, by the way, to put up on your site if you want to let people have a look at it and so on. But the point is this: long before there was ever Social Security, people actually provided for themselves in terms of health, in terms of education, in terms of unemployment assistance, in terms and so on. And they did this by getting together and forming friendly or mutual associations. Are you familiar with this material? Because I send it. It's the Great Black Hole. Most people know nothing about it.
Yeah. So
right?
just to share my understanding, it's crude. I'm not as well read as you are, but it is. I get all the concepts you're talking about, and just to come back to let the poor starve, they actually won't. I think this is the whole point, is that if people get hungry enough, they will learn to fend for themselves. It's like they give a man a fish. No, don't give him a fish. Tell him the river's over there. there's sticks there, there's string there. Go make a fishing rod and fish for yourself. It's the I believe it's that concept. Is that
but this was more than this, because what it meant that people actually got together in formal associations. They paid a weekly subscription, which was quite small by their standards. But in return for that, by the way, these associations didn't have like 10 or 100 or 1,000 members. They had hundreds of thousands of members, right? And these members were supplied, by the way, with medical treatment, okay, payment when they were out of work, payment for travel to get work, okay, and they were administered by the people themselves. They elected their own officers, right? And they admit, so it wasn't, and you were getting it, by the way, as a matter of right, not as a hand down from Lady Bountiful, okay, and it taught, and so people got experience in running their own affairs and the affairs of their associates and so on. And in some cases, by the way, some of these associations were so big that they actually supplied services for people who weren't members.
Well,
it's quite striking. Now, let me give you this fact. When the insurance bill came in, I think it was 1911, in the UK, and Ireland would have been part of it at the time. Of the 12 million people who were covered by it, 8 million people were already covered by friendly associations. Right? And even as late as post-World War II, when Ernst Bevin was bringing in the social welfare state, he wanted to incorporate these existing societies into it, but his colleagues wouldn't have any of it. And so what happened, of course, is that if you're getting something for free, quote unquote free, okay, which you're not, because you're paying and so on, you're not going to pay. And so the friendly societies got crowded out. Now, these friendly societies go back, the earliest of them go back to the 16th century. And they flourished in Ireland, in the UK, in America. There were women's, there were men's, there were, and so on. There was a whole, I mean, all of this is documented by, I am not making this up. Okay, this is not some fantasy. This is not some wild thing. This is highly documented material.
Did any of the societies survive? Because I would know of one or two similar concept ideas. There's a group called the Society of Peace, which would operate outside of the system. It's about deregistering and giving back all your documents and living outside the government. But the concept is quite similar. I wonder if
Well, the idea is again obviously sensible, but the point is that the phenomenon of crowding out, of course, happens. So when the government came in with this, then needless to say, it crowded it out, and so your average person in the street thinks, well, if we have a libertarian society, then there's not going to be social welfare, and therefore people are going to starve. And my point is, no. What you're doing is you think that a libertarian society is just like what we have now, minus welfare. That's not it at all. First of all, okay, you won't be paying. In other words, anybody who can do some work will earn some money and make some living and gain some self-respect from it as much as possible. Okay, there will be many, many fewer poor people. Okay, there will be many more resources available, by the way, for the exercise of charity if you want to do that, because even now, when our income is severely dented by the government, people still give to charity. How much more will they do it? Of course, they will inevitably be the people who will, build an extra swimming pool. But most people are not like that. But the most important part is that there will be very few people who will be simply unable, for whatever reason, right, illness or so on, to do it. And they, I can guarantee you, will be taken care of in some way, right? Now, will we have a perfect society? No. There are no perfect societies.
Great.
Will it be better than what we have now? The answer is yes. And not only from the material point of view, which is important, by the way. We live in a material world. We need material things. Not only from a material point of view, but more importantly, because instead of saying to a large segment of our population, we don't need you, we don't want you, go live on the reservation over here. Here is some money, leave us alone except in election time when you vote for us. That's destructive. That is spiritually and psychologically destructive of people. It's hard to have self-respect and so on. If it goes beyond one generation, as it has in parts, then it's really damaging to society. So not only is it materially better, but it's spiritually, socially, psychologically better. Is it perfect? No, but then there is no perfect society. If you want perfection, you're going to have to wait for another life. This isn't happening. It isn't happening here, but it will be better. So I wrote this paper just to address that problem specifically, and I'll send it to you.
Oh, no, much appreciated. I see. I want to keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. Anarcho-capitalism.
Yes.
Go.
Well, I don't use the word capitalism. And that's for a strategic reason, because the word capitalism was invented by Marx and his pals. Mm-hmm. And so if you use that word at all, you're immediately on the defensive.
Okay.
So I just don't use it. I just call it I just call it anarchism, or philosophical anarchism, or libertarian anarchism, and so on. By the way, if other people want to use it, that's fine too. I mean, I'm not telling people what they can.
Okay. So look, I like language. I like words. Propaganda is one of my favorite words because it's actually a positive word, and people don't realize that it's actually a very positive word.
Yeah.
Anarcho or anarchy or whatever derivative of that word you want to use is much more terrifying to the average human being than capitalism is.
That's right. I know. I know, and that's why I have to get the definition out of the way. So it has two meanings if you look up any dictionary. One is it will say a state of self-governance, and the other one will say a state of total disruption without government, and so on. But it's not an accident, by the way, that it is defined in such a way as to induce terror. It induces terror because that tells you that if without the government, you're going to be living in this kind of chaos. Now, there might be anarchists whose idea of a good life is living in the woods somewhere and shooting squirrels and so on. Not my idea. My idea, I'm a city boy. Well, I'm a city boy. I like living in the city. I like buildings. I like things around me. I like concert and music and so on. The whole point is anarchy doesn't mean chaos. It simply means not having an archy over you. Mm-hmm. That's all. People say, people used to say to me, my gosh, you can't be an anarchist. You wear a coat and tie. I'm wearing a coat, not the tie tonight, right? And I go, what, is there sort of a uniform? Okay. And the answer is no. I just believe that human beings can, in fact, and will, and do, and have done, will supply then what they need through association and the use of their own ingenuity. People do it all the time. So look, I'd say to people, almost everything you do during the day is anarchic. So let me give you an example. If you're walking down Grafton Street and you're thinking your thoughts, and somebody else is walking up Grafton Street thinking his thoughts, very often, sometimes you happen to kind of head towards one another, and at the last moment you realize that a collision is about to take place. Now, what do you do in that? Does a violent fight break out? Okay. No, what tends to happen is you move to one side, the person moves to the other side. You sometimes smile, you just say, oh, sorry about that, and move on. Or sometimes if you move to the same side, you just kind of grin and say, and so on, pass on. So pedestrian movement is anarchic, right? It's so slow by and large most of the time. We don't need a set of rules. You don't need to set one side of the street to go this way and one street to go that way. I came across an early film of Cork set in about 1904. It was one of these things they used to produce and then show in cinemas that people would come. And it was set up at, I mean, I don't know if you know Cork, but it was set up at the junction of the Grand Parade and Patrick Street.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
And coming around Patrick Street was a tram, and it came into the Grand Parade. And over there near what was the Queen's Old Castle was a donkey cart. There was somebody on a bicycle, and two ladies dressed appropriately in the period were walking. People were all over the place. It was chaos in that sense, but it was so slow, you didn't need to set a rule of any particular kind. So when a need arose, when speed, for example, comes into it, okay, and you can't suddenly decide, oh, this morning I think I'll drive on the right-hand side of the road. Okay, what fun that would be. Right? Eventually, a convention will arise. So I'll give you an example of this. Why is it that all of our cars, bank cards, are exactly the same shape? Did somebody pass a law?
You'd imagine aerodynamics.
No, it simply has to do with convenience. In other words, if I want people to use my banking services and I have a triangular card, right, then I'm going to be used.
I'm sorry, I misheard you. I thought you said cars. Sorry, I misheard you. No. That's why I was saying aerodynamics. Sorry, apologies.
No. The cards. The cards are all the same size, and this arises simply as a convention. eventually, everybody converges on it, and we don't even realize that they're all the same shape and the same size. But nobody dictated this.
Mm.
And it's not that people didn't know what they were doing, but no one sat down. There was no convention, no committee that said we're going to have all the cars the same size. It just happened as it were. It came about by convention.
But these things that happen almost naturally, you could say, and you could say, well,
Yeah.
it fits in the wallet, it fits in the pocket, etc., etc., etc. I personally think that's a good thing. I'll give the example of I wish it had happened naturally, but I believe their hands were forced. Phone chargers. There was 5 or 6 different types of phone charger and now the majority of phones, bar I think Apple, use the C-type charger. Now that should have happened naturally over time. But I think laws are brought in the EU or something to do with manufacturing or something like that actually forced it to happen. I don't agree with that. I wish what you said was the natural occurrence for everything. Like somebody comes up with an engine design and that just becomes the standard because it's the best, it's the most efficient, it is and everybody just goes, okay, we're all going to make this. And somebody's going to have a patent and we'll have to pay them a few pounds to do it, but we can all manufacture it.
But I'll give you another example. I mean, if you think about computers, I mean, I'm a digital immigrant. Okay, so I can remember I can remember working on a machine in Notre Dame when I was there, which just had a keyboard and no screen, and you had to type, and you had to have every line numbered, and you had to renumber all the time, and so it was like prehistoric. And then the first Macs came on the scene, and I thought they were the fanciest thing ever. And then the first PC and Windows, and then there's a whole pile of other things going, by the way. But what has happened is there's been a convergence. If you think about it, there are only really 2 major computer type systems now operating. Okay, and so on. From what was, there was a PCW. I can remember I had one of them. It was great, a tiny little thing, but that's disappeared. So they all effectively lost out, and now they're just 2. And I mean, they can stay. People are happy. And by the way, not only are they 2, but they're sort of interchangeable. So, for example, if I can remember when we had word processing systems before Microsoft Word became the default, there was a whole pile of word processing systems, and they were not interchangeable.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you couldn't simply import them into your machine. You had to have the appropriate machine. But we're now down effectively to a system where even if you're on a Mac or a PC, it doesn't really make any difference. Many of the programs run on both. Okay, the documents can be shifted back and forth. PDFs operate in the same way. So by and large, the computer field on your screen, it doesn't really matter from that point of view whether you're using a Mac or a PC. And that happened again largely by convention and by what happens in the market when people can't simply keep up and they get
you said the word. We have to go
the word there. Market.
You said market. You said market. Okay. All right. Okay. Is it alive?
Is the market alive?
Is it alive? Is it now its own entity that actually can no longer be controlled, crashed, destroyed? It can be certainly nudged, but I don't think directly interfered with. Is the global economy now too big for, or is it the opposite? Is it so big now that the foundations are so rocky that it can come crashing down? Or is it the opposite, that it's so big that it'll carry on no matter what?
That's a great question. The market is essentially simply a word for the nexus of exchanges that take place between individual human beings. So unless human beings are going to go extinct, we're going to have markets. Right. But the markets system that we have now, we don't have free markets, right? We have markets that are hampered. Okay. And what happens is that the market is an incredibly fecund way, fruitful way of producing goods and services that have moved us, by the way, in the space of 200 years from a situation where almost the entire human population was living just an inch above poverty and death to a situation where roughly about 3/4 of the entire population of now a significantly larger number of human beings are living lives that would have been regarded as practically wealthy. To be poor in the United States is to be wealthier than most people living in France. It's quite extraordinary. Okay, and the situation has accelerated in the right direction from the 1990s. It's quite startling. So even hampered as it is, by people who think they know better than everybody else how to do it, right? Think they know what happened. I mean, people couldn't organize basically, I don't know, a raffle. Okay, the market will survive. It can be hampered, it can be restricted, its functioning can be lessened, its productivity certainly is lessened by all of these interventions. But as I come back to the point I started with, unless human beings become extinct and no longer exchange, the market will continue to exist.
Should nations, individual nations, actually take their affairs back inside their borders? And the EU experiment has failed. Okay,
Yes.
it's as simple as that. We don't even need to discuss it. Can you? I asked you once. We spoke in Spaces last year briefly, and I put a question to you. I was there to. Are we as a people mature enough to actually live in a libertarian society or create a libertarian society? And you emphatically said no. we're not able. Could Ireland stand on its own in relation to what we can produce, what natural resources we have that we haven't tapped into yet, by taking back our fisheries, by, you know what I mean? In this kind of globalist world, can a small nation of 5 million people stand on its own and survive? I'm not asking us to flourish. I'm just saying, can we survive? Is it just pie in the sky to even think about it?
Okay, that's a tough question. I'll give an answer, but I'll probably have to modify it. We tried that experiment. Between 1922 and 1965.
It's a good answer.
Yep.
That's a very good answer.
And it didn't work.
Mm.
It didn't work. And the idea of being self-sufficient is called autochthony, right? In other words, you supply all yourself. Now, in an ideal world, you wouldn't have to supply anything yourself. You could trade for whatever you needed. You could trade what you are good at producing. In other words, principle of comparative advantage. In other words, you do what you do well and exchange with somebody else who does what he does well, and everybody benefits, as I said before. But so, for example, the reason we had 4 sugar factories, do you remember the 4 sugar factories? Mallow, Carlow, Tuam, and Thurles.
Tuam is where all my people are from. The sugar factory is very, very dear to my people, or was very dear to my people.
Why? Yeah. Why do we need sugar factories? Why didn't we just import it for the West Indies? Get imported a lot cheap.
Would they not beet factories though?
They were, yeah. We produce sugar from sugar beet. I can remember the lorries. Remember all the lorries?
Yeah, I remember that.
And the answer is because we wanted to have a supply of sugar within the island and not to be dependent on imports. Okay, understandable. Where are the sugar factories now?
Gone.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so here's the problem. In a way, could we go it alone now? And the answer is probably not, as things stand, but that's because of the nature of the rest of the world, right? Apart from the fact that if we were to try to do it, and not one of the things you would probably incur would be the active enmity of other countries and so on, and which wouldn't help. It's not like they would simply say, oh, well, they're just gone, so let's just trade. And so on, you would find that your ability to trade would be hampered. So, yes, and in terms of natural resources, we have a continental shelf that extends well out into the Atlantic, which is, I don't know the figures, so I'm talking to the top of my head here and so on. But if anything is likely, it's likely to be incredibly rich in oil and other minerals. We have incredibly rich fishing grounds, which we've handed over more or less stock, lock, and barrel to our European neighbours for very little, by the way. Could we recover those and use those simply on our own? Probably not. We don't have the industrial capacity, and our capacity to produce anything industrial has diminished significantly since the 1990s to do it. We don't have the workforce, the indigenous workforce, to do it. We would have to probably lease those to other people, to other companies, and for some kind of revenue stream and so on. Not entirely satisfactory, but we could do that. The fishing, again, we don't have a fishing fleet. Okay. Or what little fishing fleet we have is tied up in Killybegs and somewhere, right? And so on. So again, you can't produce the capital equipment needed even to take advantage of the natural resources that we have. But there are lots of natural resources we do not have. What we do have, however, are people. Okay, and therefore, if the world sort of opened up to free trade, as it should do, then it would be a different situation, right? We could produce good quality food. We could take advantage of the oil and the fish and so on and so forth. And yeah, we could make it might not be as affluent, quote unquote, as things are now. I don't know about you, but I don't feel particularly rich. I don't feel particularly poor either. But people talk about Ireland as one of the richest countries in Europe, and I look around and I see buildings in Luxembourg and Rome and London, and I think we don't quite look like that somehow. I don't quite know
our country is not wealthy, and
No.
GDP figures are. I must actually just you're saying you were going to share a paper with me. I might share what I wrote. It's called the Maritime and Sovereignty Act, and it's actually the budget breakdown as to basically how long it will take, what investment we will need to do, how much will have to go into coastal towns, shipbuilding down in Cork, etc., etc., etc. So
yeah,
it's costed. It's not cheap. It's not cheap. And you're talking. I don't think in election cycles. I think in decades. I wish I was as far thinking as the Chinese would think in centuries, but I'm not there yet. But I everything I think in decades.
Yeah.
So like
no, you're right. I mean, and this is again, you have to be very careful to make dramatic changes. So let me explain, because I kind of I'm going to take a slight detour and I'm going to come back again, because people say, okay, you say you're an anarcho-libertarian, and yet you live in a society, and I go, yeah, what options have I got? Okay, basically, right? What am I supposed to do? This is the world in which I find myself, and so on. So I have to make the best of things as they stand. Now, so how would we? So the question is, this is the world where we now live. This is the libertarian anarchist world. I know what this looks like. I know what this looks like. How do I get from here to here? And the answer is with extreme care, right? Because if you suddenly flick the switch and went from here to here in a moment, the result would be anarchy in the worst sense of the term. It would be a disaster, right? You cannot simply move people and traditions and their education and their beliefs and so on by flipping a switch and so on. But what you can do, I can give you the broad strokes of transition. The first thing would be to get the government out of any productive or quasi-productive activity. It's not supposed to be supplying housing or building or sugar or electricity or anything. That's for individual companies and individuals to do. So get them out of that. We've made some progress in that area. Not completely, but we made some progress. The second thing is we need to get the government out of the provision of health, education, and welfare. If you look at the budget, you will see that over 50% of what the government takes in taxes goes on health, education, and welfare. Education has dropped quite severely recently and so on, but health and welfare, bottomless pits. We need to get them out of there. And again, in line with my paper, Let the Poor Starve, not without substitutes. Okay, that's and so on. And that then leaves you only with law, justice, and security. Here's a question for you. What percentage of the government's revenue does it spend in that category? Law, justice, and security. What do you think?
So there's two things rattling around my head. There's something I read today about the government having passed 18,000 laws since 2000. So I'm thinking, oh my God, they must be spending a huge amount of money. I would say it's probably one of the smallest portions of the budget. That it's
give me a figure.
Minimal. For all three.
Yeah. And I'm not talking about the government activities themselves. I'm talking about like Gardaí and prisons and courts and anything which purports to give us
I
public
couldn't.
order.
I couldn't. I couldn't give you an educated guess. So I'm going to throw a random figure out, and I'm
Go
going to
for
say
it.
it's probably less than 1 billion.
Oh no, in terms of percentage.
Oh, as a percentage. Oh,
As a percentage.
it'd be tiny. Somewhere between 3 and 5%, I would say.
6.
6.
Good guess.
Mm.
Good guess. Hey, if you go on the government, where does
Is
your
it
money go?
it's 6%? It's higher than it was. Is that on the prisons? Or
God
what
only
is it?
knows.
It's
But here's the
increased a little
thing.
bit.
But here's the interesting thing. Remember when I was talking about what people think is the kind of place you can't go in a libertarian society?
Mm,
Had to do with law, justice, and security.
mm,
And we spend 6% of the income of the government on that, and not particularly effectively. Okay.
mm.
You would think, in other words, if that was really the function of government, shouldn't the expenditure be something
An
like,
awful lot.
yeah, and so on, and it isn't. So it's quite striking. Quite
I'm
striking.
sure. I'm sure the government will claim they're getting excellent bang for buck.
Oh, I'm sure they
Mm.
are. Okay.
Uh,
Where
it-
was I? I think I detoured myself and forgot to come back.
it's Gerald, it's irrelevant because I want to segue anyway.
All right,
And
fire
again,
away.
you can say no to this segment if you want, because you mentioned, and we're not going to go back because you said it's in the past, but we've talked about religion. We've kind of glanced over, but we have an invading force arriving all across Europe, which is not religion. It is a societal ideology of total control.
Yep.
It's called Islam.
Yep.
I do not subscribe to it. I do not. Again, it's like communism. I will not tolerate it around me because it does not conform to my social and moral norms. My people are clansmen. You know what I mean? We were tribes. We were pagan. We worshipped many different gods. Then Christianity took hold. I have a fantastic. There's a beautiful thought I have in my head that the concept of the Trinity was so easily embraced in Ireland is because our old two of the Dana were a Trinity as well. And there's links there, and it's very hard to get the full picture, but everything is older than we've been led to believe. And there's, I have faith, I have great faith, but I believe Jesus Christ was a man, an absolutely fantastic man that died and suffered for the betterment of people. I believe he left some really simple instructions, and I boil things down to their simplest form. Don't be a douchebag. Help if you can. That's it. That is the message that I've taken from my years as a Roman Catholic. My prayer is very simple. Thank you. I'm sorry. I will do better. I say it once in the morning, and that's it. And that's it. I'm done. And then in other times, I will go to church quietly and have my private conversation, or I'll say my private apologies, or I'll ask for forgiveness. But I am Christian. I believe there's a higher power. I believe a man walked this earth, and I believe he died for our sins. I don't. I'm not for a second going to say that it's wrong for any other human being to believe something different to me, and I believe every single individual has the right to believe whatever they want in private, in their own space and own domain. Your space and domain is not the island of Ireland. If you happen to be living here and you want to worship your God privately in your own house, that is your business. It is not for me to say you're a free individual. You cannot bring your other beliefs into my system because it's disruptive to my system. It's as simple as that. I'm happy with my system. I'm happy with my people. I'm happy with my land. I don't want your system. And there's nothing wrong with me saying I don't want your system. It's a very fair and reasonable point to make. I have no wish to go to your country and go on a Christian crusade. They're your countries. You can have them. I don't want them. But you're not coming here. And I'm very I'm not tolerant at all. And they can call me all the isms and whatever they want. I don't care because I know I'm coming from a very sane and logical standpoint. Your stuff doesn't align with mine, therefore I don't want it here. I believe it's harmful. I don't want it here.
I put up a short tweet, short for me, which said, "The paradox of tolerance. Can you tolerate the intolerant?"
Mm.
First of all, let me say that, broadly speaking, I fully subscribe to what you just said. I might go a bit further, but that in essence, yeah. And I would say, okay, what you're talking about here is a very peculiar phenomenon. Could I say, but before that, by the way, I taught Eastern philosophy for 30 years. So I know Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism, and Hinduism. Okay, I'm not speaking from a position of ignorance, and so on. But and if somebody living in Ireland wants to become a Taoist, that's entirely their affair. It's not my business. If we want to talk about it, and that's great, and so on. Somebody wants to be a Buddhist, that's fine. It's not a problem with me. I don't have a problem with that. I might have a problem to some extent with Hindus if they import the kind of nationalism that they give vent to in the subcontinent, but that's unlikely. So by and large, I wouldn't have a problem with Hindus and so on, or Confucianism, for that matter. But I have one hell of a problem with Islam, because it is what I call a compact system, which is that your religious beliefs, your morals, and your politics are all bound up inextricably together. And that inextricable is a problem. In the West, Christianity, in the first 1,000 years of its existence in the West, would have been similar in some respects. But for historical reasons that I won't go into now, it would take simply too long, we had the creation of two centers, two poles, if you like, what we would now call largely church and state, though that's an anachronism. We didn't have states in those days, but the church and the empire and so on, each claiming a certain authority, each claiming, and so on. And between the tension, in the interval, in the tension between, that created a space for the development of the individual, which is a Western concept. No other culture has this concept in the way that we have it. It's partly historical accent, but nonetheless, it is here. And that is essential. Islam went through a period, went through a kind of development from the 6th century up to about the year 1000. And they had several schools. Excuse me. One of those schools was a sort of rationalist school, which was attempting to kind of take a rationalist approach to the scriptures, to the Quran, and got exterminated. Mm-hmm. That whole movement was shut down. And that's the end of that. It is theoretically possible, I imagine, in some mystical world, to differentiate within Islam the politics, the religion, and the morality, and so on, and the social practices. Practically speaking, it has been shown to be impossible. Wherever they've gone, they have been intolerant. They have wiped out the existing beliefs and so on. And you're much more charitable than I am. I mean, I want Asia Minor back. I want North Africa back. Okay, I don't regard them as their countries. I want Egypt back. Egypt was a Christian country. Mm-hmm. Okay,
Lebanon. So there's huge amounts of
and by the way, Lebanon is
Yeah.
disappearing in front of our eyes. And I regard the Crusades, by the way, as a reactionary movement to the invasion. And we've been under pressure, by the way, in the West from Islam from its inception. They've been pressing in the Mediterranean, okay, around the coast, inland, and from the time of the Ottomans all the way. We had the Turks outside the gates of Vienna. Now they don't have to sit outside the gates; they can be in Vienna, right? There are 60 million Muslims in thing. This is an existential threat. I don't care. Let me make this absolutely clear. I regard the Quran as more or less specious nonsense. By and large, there are some things in there that are okay. Most of it's not. There's a lot of plagiarism of various kinds of Gnostic Christian texts and so on and so forth. Some direct copying from the Gospels and so on. But by and large, it's nonsensical. Muhammad wasn't a prophet in any way. Leave that to one side. I dislike intensely their conception of God, which is a kind of super elevated conception of a tribal, arbitrary, capricious tribal chief. It's not something that I recognize. I don't care how much they preface it by saying the Almighty, the Compassionate, the Merciful, right? I don't believe it. When you read the rest of the Quran, I've read it 3 times in 3 different editions. It doesn't work, right? But the point is, if that's what they want to believe in, fine. The problem isn't there. The problem is that Islam, from its own conception, not from our conception, is not a cannot exist permanently as one religion among others in a tolerant environment. That's not possible. It has never happened. They're always pushing to wipe out, and it's a matter of numbers. And therefore, I would argue that in this case, it's not. I don't care about their intellectual beliefs, much as I think that they're weird and so on, or religious beliefs. That's not the point. Point is, I'm worried about them achieving a kind of political and social dominance in my country, so that not me, because I'll be dead, but my children and my grandchildren will have to live as second class, if they are allowed to live at all, as second class citizens, or else convert to Islam. That's
How do you feel?
appalling prospect.
How do you feel? We're speaking very generally now, and again, I'm going to give you the option because I'm not going to put you in the spot. How do you feel about speaking about individuals that are public figures and have ran for election? Do you prefer not to give an opinion on an individual? I have a name in the top of my head. Actually, I have two names in the top of my head.
Yeah, I have some names as well, but I won't talk about specific individuals.
Perfect. No, that's why I ask. That's why I ask.
But I would do certain things. For example, I would ban any production of halal meat.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I would say that no one can claim religious status if they include in their religion a principle of seeking the death of apostates. For example, we're going to do that. Okay. I would prevent. I was shocked. I was down in Wicklow about a week ago, and I was passing a butcher shop, and they had halal on the window, and I thought, oh my God. Yeah, this is Wicklow. Seriously.
It's been in the food. It's only coming to light now, and because I worked in the retail trade for quite some time, this halal thing has been going on for. Now, here's the other thing: the people certifying these halal products are making an absolute fortune, and
Sure
there's only three of them. Lots of different companies, lots of different directors. There's only three individuals in the country milking, because they're the only people who can certify in Ireland. So
yeah,
it's a money racket as well.
Oh yeah, undoubtedly, because money always comes into it. Cherchez l'argent.
Can I'm going to play devil's advocate, right?
Yeah, far away.
I am now a government official, and I'm going to tell you that their right to religious expression is constitutionally protected.
Yeah.
So how?
To which I will say that I will make the point again that it's not just a religion. It's not just one system. For example, look, I mean, we have different varieties of Christianity, right? And there were times when let's say relations between certain branches were a little bit hotter than they are now. But we've learned to live together. Okay, so yeah, that's not possible. In other words, what we're saying is it's just not possible. And what the religious thing, if you like, is a cloak, okay, over the other stuff. That's just the problem. And it gives the protection. And therefore they can say, oh no, it's religious and so on. I go, well, you have it and so on. So I would not allow any person who is a Muslim to work in this country, unless it was absolutely required for some particular reason. I would not give anybody who it was a Muslim citizenship. I would make sure that if they're here, their residence was limited, and so on and so on. I would encourage all those who are currently here, of which there are about 60,000, to return to where they came. It turns my stomach, frankly, when I walk down a street in Ireland and see a woman covered from head to toe in some medieval garb. I'm absolutely shocked by this.
You know the councils all around the country having a new obsession with granting mosques planning permission.
Oh yeah, great. That's just what we need.
There's mosques popping up everywhere. There's one being built in Clonmel as we speak. It's nearly finished, and they've purchased most of the empty shops. In fairness, they were empty shops because so many Irish businesses have gone out of business, and now they've created this whole street where their mosque is. So all the businesses will be Muslim, and the mosque will be there. But again, for me to highlight this and me to say this, I'm the bad guy.
I know. We're the bad guys and so on. Yeah, it's quite extraordinary.
It's it's funny and worrying. And again, do you know what I want to? I'm just conscious of time, conscious of your time, and I'm conscious of the viewers' time. I don't. We're an hour and a half in. Are you good for another 15 minutes?
Good for another 10 or 15 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Perfect. I'm gonna give you the magic stick of power, and I do this. I do this to everybody, right? But we're actually going to change. I'm going to change it a little bit. It's not going to be a magic stick. I'm going to give you a genie's lamp.
Yeah.
You're going to get 3 wishes, and
Oh gosh.
three realistic things. Not nothing pie in the sky, but 3. We'll tighten it down. I'm going to give you 3 government policies you can implement that will be for the betterment of our Indigenous brothers and sisters. I know it's a tough one.
You want me to answer that now?
Yep.
Oh, God.
This is the issue. I used to have great fun with this when I used to actually put this out live, because it was normally the magic stick of power I gave people.
The first thing is, I would introduce a constitutional amendment to amend the provision on free expression so that it goes a whole lot closer to the American version. In other words, it's not just balanced.
Excellent.
It's not just the one hand and one on the other, right? It would be that people have the right, subject to obviously not threatening violence on somebody or other, the usual things, to say whatever they want in whatever way, and they cannot be subjected to government or legal pressure to do otherwise. That would be my number one thing, because at least if you can have that, and that's one of the reasons why I was so hot working against the so-called hate speech bills a couple of years ago. Thank God for those students they were in UCC who started Free Speech Ireland. God bless them. They were great. Terrific.
That was students that started that,
That was
it?
Students. Oh,
What?
yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And they're still around. And they're still working. You know, they were great. I mean, working with almost no resources. And they were the ones who initiated things. And they got the initial meeting in Wynn's Hotel, which I spoke up and running. And after that, it kind of caught fire and went off in various directions. So, yeah, no, God bless them. They were great. So that's the first thing. Okay, so absolute in that sense, free speech. No, we're talking government policy here, right? Is that what you said?
You can broaden it if it's interesting. Doesn't have to be government policy, but grounded in reality.
Okay. The second thing, I would have a stringent immigration policy. Stringent. Now, this may sound strange for somebody who's a libertarian anarchist and so on. I don't believe in government, but this is the world we live in. And so on, until such time as we change, we have to have something here. So it would be, in other words, nobody would be admitted to this country except on vacation. Okay. Unless somebody could show that their being here was a net gain, a net benefit to the country. And not just to particular employers, by the way, who happen to be situated here, but to the country.
Yeah.
They would, if they wanted to become Irish citizens, okay, they would have to go through a long and arduous process, if at all, okay? And there would be no guarantee that it would be successful. We're talking at least something in the region of like 10 years.
Oh, yeah, that's the magic number,
okay.
yeah.
And so I mean, and then, I mean, they would, so by the way, this would not include anybody who is a practicing Muslim. That would be, for me, would be a no-no. I'm sorry. Okay. You can be there, but not in this country out of it. So that's my second one. Okay. What are my chances of getting that one passed? Right. Yeah. So that's two.
You will be very surprised what happens in the next decade. I sincerely hope you're around to see it. You're going to be surprised, because that valve, the steam it's all across Europe. It is absolutely ready to pop, and when it pops, there's no going back. One side is going to win and one side is going to lose, and I'm not going to be on the losing side.
Well, as I sometimes say to people, I'm from Cork. I've lost on many occasions, but I hate losing.
Yeah.
Somebody said, if you hate losing, you shouldn't be playing. You shouldn't be playing the game. I was that way since the time I played chess with my dad when I was 4 or 5. Okay, any game. I've lost more battles in my life than I've won, but I've never liked it, and I hate losing.
I just put something. Sorry, before you give me your third one, I've just put something on my list of things to do. It's gone on my bucket list. Are you a chess player?
Yes.
I am going to play you in chess at some stage in our lives. I'm making that now.
Excellent.
I'll find you somewhere. I'll meet you for a cup of coffee somewhere, and I'll play
My
chess.
my handle is if I'm on chess.com, and it's Philochancer, Philochancer.
I stopped playing on online. I had to. I
We
moved
can
away
we can
from
do it on
all-
Lead Chess, but whatever. We can meet and do it over the board. We'd be more civilized. So that's two. I know you're putting me on the spot, so I don't think I'm doing too badly off the top of my head.
No,
right?
you're flying.
Free
Yeah,
speech
you're-
and so on. The third one, I'm gonna have to take a rain check on the third one because nothing obviously pops to mind. But if you gave me another 10, 15, 20 minutes or half an hour, I would come up with something. But if I got those first two, right?
fix so many problems.
Yeah, and so on. The third one, well, I mean, if you wanted a kind of temporary third one, it would be the removal of as many restrictions and regulations on free trade within the country and from outside within between our country and another country as is humanly possible.
I'm greedy. Okay, so I'm gonna fire two more questions at you. Have in relation to markets and free trade, have human beings been turned into a commodity? And is that why?
Meaning?
Is that as in that we'll say it's not just happening in Ireland, as in these people that are being shipped here through IPAS, etc., are human beings now cattle? Is that what's happening with the mass migration and the mass movement of people? Are forces that be shifting stock, so to speak?
I don't quite know how to answer that one. It's certainly the case that the legal processes that were in place for dealing with migration in Ireland and in Europe generally are not fit for purpose. They were not set up to deal with large scale immigration on the numbers, illegal immigration, we're doing it. So in other words, where we have people, and I mean, it takes forever to process them, and even when they're processed, they can't get them to go away, right? It's just quite extraordinary. So we have left ourselves, like it or not, defenseless out of I would say, a laudable in some ways, but misguided sense of tolerance. In other words, it's quite, somebody's quite has pointed out that isn't it quite striking that if you look at the way refugees generally tend to move, you tend to get women and children and so on. Where are all the women and children? Where are these people? Why is it all men of a certain age? Okay, not a lot of men my age.
Yeah, one could be very, very cynical and say there's no women and children because it's now safe for them to stay in their own countries because all their lunatics and bad men are gone. They're here.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, in my more cynical moments, I have a reverse plan. I'm going to identify, like Gilbert and Sullivan. Someday it may happen that a victim must be found. I've got a little list. I make a little list of all the no good nicks, Irish good no good nicks, and I'm going to export them. Okay, to my least favorite spots in the world. But that's another fantasy.
Again, you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. Final question. I promise I'll let you go there.
All right. All right.
Have you,
not a problem.
Have you, Amelia?
Yes.
Yes. Just your opinion. Yes or no. We'll start with that.
Yes.
Is he? You see, because the media is biased, I get such conflicting reports on how the country is doing economically. You have one side that says no, people are starving and the system is falling apart, etc., and then you get other reports. Well, actually, no, they're doing better than they've ever done before, and their trade deals are fantastic, and they actually benefit the indigenous population. And a lot of the civil service is gone, a lot of the waste is gone. But we spoke earlier that this needs to be done slowly. He literally got the Band-Aid and went. Whoosh.
Well, yes, he did it relatively faster than I would probably have done it and so on. But again, given his environment, it might have been necessary to do it in that particular way. Look, I don't know any more than you do. I mean, I'm just simply a consumer of news coming out. I can't guarantee that what is being said is correct or incorrect. I don't know, but overall, on balance, I'm kind of biased. I'm predisposed to believe that what's happening is better than not. There are libertarians I won't mention any names, who take a very dim view of him. Not least because some libertarians are purists. That is to say, in other words, they don't want to get their hands dirty. And I'm going, look, hang on a second, this is the world in which we live. We may not like it, but whether you like it or not, it's like the old joke about the Corkman who came to Dublin and found in the old days when you had policemen doing point duty, okay, and he was looking to get to Drimnah or someplace, and the cop was trying to explain to him, and he wasn't succeeding. And in the end, he said, "Look, sir," he said, "if I wouldn't start from here." Okay, so this is where we are. Okay, we have no choice but to start from here. It would be wonderful if we had a blank canvas to draw on. We don't. And by the way, blank canvases are the thing of radical leftists. We've seen it in Kampuchea, in Cambodia, and in China, and it always ends up with a lot of people dying.
Death.
It's so whatever's happening in Argentina, as far as I can tell, it's nothing like that. Okay, my guess
is it a great experiment?
It is an experiment. I would say it's more than likely to be certainly not the case that it's the disaster that some of our leftist media would portray it as, and it's probably less startlingly good than some of our more rah-rah libertarian types would have. But I suspect the truth is somewhere in between, more on the plus than on the negative, but I can't give any evidence for that belief.
I have I've not been smart to you. I could stay talking to you for hours upon hours upon hours, but I'm conscious of people. As I said in the very first video I did, time is a commodity, and it's actually the only commodity that I care about. I'm not going to take any more of yours. I really appreciate you doing this. It's been a fantastic conversation, and like I said, I'm in awe of your work. I haven't gotten around to all the books. I'm actually, I'll be honest with you, I'm starting to cheat now because I'm so caught for time. I'm actually getting AI to give me a synopsis of books I want to read, but then I find there's not enough, and I'm actually telling it, okay, I need a bit more than that, and in the end, I end up with maybe 30 or 40 pages, and I'm trying to take the knowledge in. My brain doesn't work. I don't do well with a book in my hand. I just recently finished a book on Brehon law. And I have another one on Irish mythology and how it links into some old folklore and stuff like that. And I'm about halfway through that, but it takes me just so long to get through. Too many distractions, too many other fingers, pots and pies and stuff like that. And this is why Twitter. This is why Twitter is my weapon of choice.
Oh God, but it's a drug. I need to do less, but anyway.
But I can consume information, and I mean huge amounts of information, in the 260 characters. I can take information in like that. I don't know, is that fish brain or what it is, but I can consume on Twitter. I can consume knowledge. I find it hard to consume knowledge in mass form, so to speak, or books, or and it's time. Call a spade a spade. It's laziness. You know what I mean? You're always just too busy doing something else, and and it sounds funny that, well, isn't sitting down reading a book relaxing? Well, no, you're actually too lazy to do that sometimes as well, because sometimes it's more fun just to doom scroll, so to speak. Anyway, Gerard, thank you very much.
So listen, Martin, thanks for the conversation. I enjoyed it. And let's meet and have a game of chess.
Absolutely. I always ask people in a couple of months' time, if you're free, I want to come back and do it again, because I like to check in, kind of thing, or next year sometime or anything like that. So I
think you squeezed me dry. I don't think I have anything left.
You'd be surprised. Again, thank you very much. I'm just going to drop you down. You can stay in the green room if you want, or you can just exit.
No, I'd stay here. One
second out. So I'm just going to drop you down. Just want to say thank you very much for watching, everybody. That was a really enjoyable conversation. That conversation is the reason I do this. It was absolutely fascinating, and I think I've learned about 4 new words as well, which I may have to go back and ask what they mean again. Thank you for watching.